Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Donna Chacko. She's a retired physician and the founder of serenityandhealth.com. That's an online space dedicated to helping people improve the health of their body, mind, and spirit. We are on the same wavelength, Donna.
Definitely.
Yes, welcome. And you're also an author of a book called Pilgrimage, A Doctor's Healing Journey. I'm very keenly interested in your story. So I'm halfway through your book now and just really enjoying the beautiful writing, your transparency and wisdom. So thank you so much for being here. I know your time is very valuable, and I'm grateful you chose to spend a little time with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored, and it's been terrific getting to know you two ladies. We do share a lot. It's quite amazing. So I'm sure this is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm excited for you to share more about your story and just the message that God's given you through your life and just all the wisdom that you have. So tell us about your professional journey. I know you've had several transitions in your career as a physician, and you started as a radiation oncologist and then transitioned into being a family medicine doctor, which that is definitely quite a unique story. Let us know what's just kind of give us your background in medicine and what
Okay.
prompted you to make those big transitions.
Well, I graduated from medical school 50 years ago this year.
Wow.
So that's one
Wow.
thing. And I
Nice.
knew I wanted to be a doctor in high school. Just by accident, I determined that I'd never even met a female physician or seen one.
Mm.
Um, and I just uh, worked real hard always, and in decided I wanted to do radiation oncology when I graduated. And I chose that especially because it's very meaningful. You get to know your patients. You It's a hard time in life for those people going through cancer.
Mhm.
It also had better hours than some other specialties, and I had hoped I would be a mother. That part worked out well. And I loved radiation oncology, those relationships with patients. Um, Through the years, though, being married and raising kids, um, I did not relate my faith to my work very much because I was on my treadmill too busy to spend any time with my faith. In fact, I let it go.
Mhm.
And so, as life continued from a professional side, I loved my medical practice, but a couple things were happening. Um, Life was challenging for me personally in my marriage, and I had come back to my faith. And I started wondering if I was doing God's will, by making all this money, doing his will, taking care of people. It seemed like a sort of a contradiction. And then
Mhm.
I couldn't even volunteer in the free clinic because my specialty was very narrow, very narrow. I was very competent at what I did, but it was a very narrow specialty. So I didn't know much about general medicine. And I also started to realize that changes were coming at the hospital I worked, where I didn't think I would have proper equipment and technology. It's very expensive to have a radiation oncology center, and we were very small. And I just kind of began to see that I was going to have to make a change. And it was around this time that my husband got sick. And when I was 48, he died. So our kids were teens, late teens. One was in college or going off to college. So um, that sort of freed me. And I just said, well, I'm gonna be a primary care doctor. And I thought I would just tag along with my colleagues and learn some things, and then I could go do this. And I had totally underestimated how much I had to learn. And so bottom line was I ended up doing a 3-year family practice residency, which I then finished when I was 53.
That really shows your heart of wanting to help people in a more broad fashion, because that is a big deal going back in your late 40s after a major
It's
loss and grief. And goodness, you are a strong woman, Donna.
well, I think there's some naivete there. I mean, sort of, I just jumped. It's sort of the same thing when I wrote my book. I had no idea. I just jumped and go like, whoa, this is way harder than I thought. But anyway, that my life was so changing through all these years because I had returned to my faith and I did see more meaning in all of this. And I started to understand medicine more differently also as I started to get a grip on mind body medicine. And, the way I learned medicine is the doctor makes a diagnosis and the doctor gives a treatment and then you move on. And
Mhm.
it was experiencing family medicine and seeing the whole breadth and the social influence and stress and childhood influences, all of that. And that was just like totally um, brought to mind and impressed upon me when I finished my training and started working in the inner city in Washington, D.C. Because I never dreamed how that health could be so affected by, well, I knew, of course, about the statistics, but seeing it, how health could just be devastated by poverty and trauma and stress. It was quite an experience. And I also saw in Washington how health could be restored by and this was particularly I noticed this like working at a place called Christ House, which was a medical recovery facility for homeless people. And these because mainly men would come in off the streets, a lot of addiction and mental health, but just a lot of trauma and neglect and poverty and have to say injustice and discrimination, but also just bad behavior and a lot of mistakes. Those folks made a lot of mistakes, right? But you could see them start to heal just with the love and respect they received even before they got medical care. So this was the kind of message I was kind of soaking in through those years. And
Mhm.
by this time, my kids were in college, so I had moved from Florida to Washington. It was a lot of change.
You've emphasized that your focus on health has also gone through transition from the focus on physical well-being to, as you mentioned, mind-body medicine, and then most recently to a deeper focus on spiritual health and flourishing. So tell us how that transition occurred and what books, resources, experiences contributed most to the refinement of your focus.
Yeah, it's a journey that surprises even me really because uh, toward the end of my time in Washington D.C., then I got to experience myself stress because I was one of the many physicians who had to deal with burnout. It was tough. There was the needs of these people were just never ending, and the last straw that broke me was when we got a new electronic medical record in our department, and the old electronic medical record did not communicate with the new electronic medical record, if you can imagine that. So almost all of the records that I needed, I had to manually put in. Um, some was transferred, but not enough to be useful. Anyway, that process did me in. And it's very hard to want to be a good doctor and patient and kind and efficient and just to be so irritable and I sort of have health problems as well. So mainly just musculoskeletal stuff and walking problems from arthritis. But by the time I then left, because I was 64, I wouldn't have retired that early. I still loved medicine, but I couldn't do it anymore. So in my process of healing then, after retirement, this is when I started to reflect back and try and understand how everything had happened, because my marriage, which I alluded to, was extremely difficult. And I didn't deal with it as I didn't deal with many things. Maybe I didn't want to, maybe I buried all those problems, but I just stayed busy. And, as a mother with 3 kids who work full time, I was really busy. And my husband was not, he was from another culture, and he was not someone who incorporated home duties and childcare into his schedule. It was on me. And of course, I didn't have the ability. I've read about people, all of us, they call it like your first adulthood. You just are kind of going through doing the stuff. And I never took any time or had any time. I guess I could have taken it to try and sort things out. So when I retired then, and had to recover my sanity and my physical health, it was quite an experience for me. And I began to, especially as I tried to start Serenity and Health and research what was meditation and mindfulness, and kind of understanding the connection of emotional health to spiritual health. Um, and as I started to write the book, it was not going to be a memoir at first. It was going to be like a self help book because I had thought I had it all figured out, right? But as I started to write it, and I was going to base it on my life, I just realized what a mess it was. I didn't even know kind of what had motivated me. Why had I not been able to adjust my schedule? Why it was not even a possibility that I could have dreamed of, that could have come upon some sort of part-time arrangement back then. Um, or why was I not able to express myself to my husband about obvious things like that I should have time to go visit and spend time with my mother or my brothers? So I ended up seeing a therapist before I could even know enough about myself to write the book. And understanding from a psychology point of view, the true self, but also the true self from the spiritual point of view, that's kind of like our God within us. All of this led me to understand myself better, and to see all the things I wish I had done differently, and to have to learn how to forgive myself and learn from it, you know? And
Mm.
that's been a continuing journey.
Your presence and your just showing up and sharing your story is very healing for me. And as a fellow physician and had my own burnout story a little earlier in life, but being a professional woman, especially in medicine, can be lonely. I think, and it's in you're a little bit ahead of me in terms of pioneering through your training and early career. And as you said, you didn't even know a female physician when you started thinking about becoming one. So I just want to thank you for sharing your story. And I think that we could talk for hours
Yeah, yes, we could.
around around this, especially the being in medicine where it is such a male kind of well, it isn't male dominated anymore, but at least the mindset and the culture of medicine to
Mhm,
be like, of course you have to be full time,
mhm,
and what
mhm.
kind of option would there be for part time, and then just navigating the challenges that I think all women face to some degree with
Right,
the challenge of the equity in home
right.
duties, the child rearing.
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
puts a
And
lot.
at the same time, we're put on a pedestal. We're treated with such deference. I mean, I think it's still that way. Probably was more in the past, I suspect. But it breeds a pride, and I recognize that. Who I was from the outside was so different from who I was. All my struggles. I don't think that many people recognize what was going on inside of our house, and just trying to let that go.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And you get into that early on in your book. You share the story of just the disconnect between you and your husband in terms of parenting styles and just emotional
Right.
intimacy and being able to express yourself. That must have been a major challenge for you.
Well, you know what really fascinates me is how going through it, how little understanding I had.
Mm.
And how now it's not like I understand it perfectly, but I do understand a lot more of what motivated me and the imprints from childhood that made me follow a certain path, my need to, avoid conflict and be nice, and certainly the need to work and be productive and efficient. That was probably the number one thing, but my brothers and I all learned that above everything else, above relationships, above everything. That's
Mhm.
what we learned.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just fascinating. I think back like, wow, uh, all the people way younger who are busy raising kids, they are maybe going through that too. They're just on their treadmill doing their thing, like, and
Mhm.
it's so easy to not really understand your motivations, or maybe we don't want to, so we don't. We just stay busy. I saw this quote from Blaise Pascal recently that the 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 reason for all of our misery is that we're unable to go sit in a room alone in quiet or
Mm.
something like that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, gauge the presence of Christ, yeah, comfortably. You were talking about just, kind of being on the treadmill and that drive to work. That's an area that I've had some personal healing in, as well as overcoming performance orientation, where the drive and the identity is found in what you do instead of who you are, and learning
Yeah.
to reconcile that my identity is first in Christ, and that is stable and secure, and learning how to do whatever I put my hand to, being um, motivated out of a desire to honor and please Christ, instead of get affirmation that makes me feel valuable, but recognizing that, instead of performing for love, basically. I think that is
Right.
something that a lot of people struggle with, is trying to do everything in order to be loved, and instead of resting in the love of Christ, that he's already given us that place of rest, and then out of that place of rest, doing the things that bring him honor and glory, and put our gifts and talents to work, and just put his love on display to the world.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I love that. And I wanted to share that uh, you talked about a burnout experience, Donna, after working in a inner city clinic for homeless men, that and transitioning the electronic medical record. That certainly seems like a recipe for burnout. I don't know if you have this perspective, but I now my burnout was a good over a decade ago at this point, and I am finally able to look at it as a gift in some ways, and that it did shake me up and cause me to look and be introspective and seek God and
Right.
understand the patterns and the underlying motivation, what was driving me and what were the challenges. So I definitely see it as a gift, and
Yeah.
part of the gift has been that God has taught me about surrender.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, as like most physicians, very driven, goal oriented, highly productive and competent. And we do things, we take care of things, and And God has taught me that the essential part of the spiritual journey, really the beginning of it, is a surrender process where we just say, okay, God, here I am. I'm at the end of
Absolutely.
myself, and um, what's next? I want to be a part of what you're doing, and so I understand that's been part of your journey as well. I'd love for you to explore the topic of surrender and how it's played a role in your journey, what
Y-
that looks like.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Cynthia. You read books and spiritual writers talk about surrender, and
Mhm.
but then when you go through an experience and have to surrender, it's for me, it was unbelievably difficult. And the process lasted a long time, and it wasn't the burnout. My surrender came in my marriage.
Mhm.
And as the difficulties between my husband and I increased over the years, particularly were accentuated when our daughters became teenagers. Um, and it became evident that our home was just a dysfunctional brew of potential problems for our children. Um, I was just floundering and didn't I couldn't see my role in it. I couldn't change my husband's role in it. And that's what brought me back to my faith, my suffering, and just confusion and probably anger and who knows what, right?
Mhm.
And eventually the problems continued, and I went to a divorce lawyer. It wasn't right that the children be raised in this home like that, but I didn't know what to do. So, but I didn't want to get a divorce, but I did not want to get a divorce. So I turned to God, and eventually e- several things happened, and it became very clear to me that God did not want me to get a divorce. But the problem was that would mean I would still be married and the children would still be in the house and we would all be together, right? And I just didn't understand what would happen to them, to our family. And I was so angry with God that he could possibly want me to stay married, and what would happen to the girls. And it just eventually came to me that I had to trust him. I had
Mhm.
to surrender my family to him. And it was such a horrible experience, so difficult. And somewhere along the line I realized it must have been a little bit like Abraham and Isaac. He had to be willing to sacrifice. And what I realized is you can't it seemed to me this relationship between trust and surrender were just key. No, I mean, I think in crisis sometimes you surrender and that's how you learn to trust, but maybe more often in my case I had to build up my trust and then I surrendered. But
Mm.
um, it was really such a difficult process, and it wasn't like the day after I made this final decision that things were beautiful and wonderful. The tensions eased for sure. If you stop talking about divorce all the time, it's less tense, right?
Right.
But what really happened was, um, within a few years, my husband got sick, and then at probably maybe 4 years or something, I'm not sure, after this surrender, um, eh, he died of leukemia. So that was not the outcome I was looking for. And
Mm.
that was a complicated time in my life too, because naturally we had been married 27 years. I
Mm.
mean, I grieved for the man I married and our family and the girls, but there was some relief, like, oh my gosh. And it was after that time that I changed specialties. So clearly that had a role in that decision as well. But
Mhm.
I've thought about that surrender many times since then. And I think I continue to understand why it's just key to any kind of spiritual journey. And you asked how it applies like today.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure we'll have time to talk about it very much, but I have become um, very convinced that for me, centering prayer, which is a form of Christian meditation, is an extremely valuable method to help me be closer to God and to open myself more to his presence within me, to his healing presence within me, right? But to do centering prayer means you have to devote some time to it.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, this was a huge hurdle. I did not want to surrender 20 minutes of my time to sit there. I mean, and I realized that part of the game, that surrender and trusting God with my time was part of the benefit, to just do that over and over. So anyway,
There's a song, one of my favorite worship songs, by a group out of Tennessee called United Pursuit, and they have a song that the lyrics are, "Be still my soul,
oh yes,
hope in God." And sometimes I just have to sing that over myself. Be still my soul, because my mind is thinking about so many things, and being kind of task oriented, I'm thinking about things that need to be done, and wrangling 3 kids and activities. It's like I'm constantly having to be strategic with what time I have to leave the house to get
right,
to the car rider line in time. And so there's a lot of thought being given toward the time and the schedule and that. And
right,
I have to surrender that and tell my soul to quiet itself so
right,
that I can hear the voice of God and receive his peace to lead me through the busiest of days.
right, right.
Mhm.
I mean, you would think it would be easy for me now because I'm retired, but it's so ingrained.
I do think that surrendering our time and being in quiet and the feet of Jesus is just the remedy for
Mhm.
our goal driven, just six performance oriented culture.
Mhm.
For sharing it, we'll definitely take time to do that here at the end, Donna.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Donna, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but pondering your history and the wisdom that you have gained from your life experiences, what is one thing that you may have done differently that would have made a difference in your life that someone else listening to this podcast today might benefit from considering as well?
Yeah, I have thought about that because um and I when I answer your question, I'm thinking about younger people, the me back when I was in my 30s and 40s,
Mhm.
oblivious to it too much, just as I say, busy on my treadmill. What could I have done? What could those people listening who are in that same phase of life now, what can they do? So maybe they don't have to be such a quite slow learner as I was. I don't know. Maybe they will have better experiences, better relationships, a closer relationship with God, etc., if they do this one thing. And I'm convinced that that one thing is they absolutely have to devote and prioritize some time and space for quiet and for God. If you're a believer, then for prayer for God. If you're not, for quiet reflection, nature. But if you don't have some time every single day, I mean, 10 minutes in the early morning, I, I, I didn't do that, but I do think it's possible. I think we all have to admit that we fritter away 10 minutes during the day or that we could sleep less than 10, 10 minutes less and survive. I'm going to set my alarm 15 minutes early. I'm going to trust that God will take care of that sleep. And plus, the benefit from the quiet time will probably counteract any loss of sleep anyway. So that's the one thing.
I want to take a good 3 to 5 minutes
Okay.
on it. If you would lead us through, I know it's abbreviated for what would be ideal, but just to give us a little taste of centering prayer, help our help us and our listeners know how we can do this on our own time. And thank you for that gentle nudge to set aside that time in the morning. For
Yeah.
me, the key is going to be going to bed 15 minutes earlier.
Yeah. Well, of course, it doesn't have to be in the morning. People have to find their own
Mhm.
rhythm, and it doesn't have to be centering prayer either. There's lots of ways to do this, Bible
Mhm.
study and reflection and meditation upon the mysteries of the Bible. But this is one method, and it's a very healing prayer. Uh, we talk about the divine therapist within. And in the process of opening yourself and quieting yourself in this kind of prayer, we can become close to that, and the language is one with that healing presence within. Anyway, it's beyond words. So this prayer method is basically just a simple, user-friendly way of describing what Christian meditation has been for centuries. Dating back to John of the Cross and modern times up to Thomas Merton, and Thomas Keating has written a lot, especially. And there's the the four guidelines that are widely used and suggested by the reference I'm going to give, contemplativeoutreach.org is where you can find all of this. Um, the four guidelines are that it's a very simple process. You're going to sit in a chair and with your back erect and your hands on your legs, on your thighs. You're previously going to have thought about a special sacred word to use like an anchor, a reminder. It's not a mantra. You use this word during your prayer process at the beginning, and when when you find yourself really engaged in the thoughts that will continue to come, guaranteed. So as you're sitting there in this prayer time, when you realize you've just planned your kid's birthday party, then you start saying your prayer word again as an anchor, and then let it drift away. And just when you have thoughts, the next guideline is that you don't fuss about it. That's normal. You just let them go like boats on the stream. They're just drifting by. And um, you state your intention to sit and say yes during this prayer time. The intention is key, to say yes to the presence and action of God. That's the whole thing. That's what you're doing. You're like Mary at the feet of Jesus, doing the better thing, to say yes to the presence and
Mhm.
action of God, like an intimate friend you're just going to cuddle up with. And then at the end, just take a moment to slowly transition back to the world. And so that's all there is to it. It's a very simple process, really. But there's many books written about more details and the benefits, and it's very connected also with a psychological journey to your true self. It is very much connected to healing in that way as well. So um, you can use a timer. I use an app that you could find on the website I mentioned, and maybe we'll just do it for like 1 or 2 minutes. Can I ask one of you to just say keep track of the time in a minute or two
Sure.
when we and then we'll end. So if I had my app on, it would give three gongs. So imagine three gongs, and then say your word quietly to get you started. And just we say yes to the presence and action of God. And now we'll begin.
Ooh, that was probably not the best gong for the ending.
Well,
Not as soothing as it should be.
just a little tiny taste of what it might be like, and it's not something you do so that you feel holy and sacred and special when you're done. It's something that brings healing and grace with time, with that continued surrender.
I love that idea of focusing on a word. Brooke and I, we've been on a journey of talking about the word shalom,
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
because that was my word.
that would be a perfect word.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
I was this morning just reading in Psalm 27. And that's the psalm that, verse 4, the one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. And then down in verse 8, this has been one of those, I would call it, gripping scriptures for me, that every time I read it, it's like there's a leap in my spirit. And it says, my heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I am coming. And I
Oh,
was just reminded of
yeah.
that imagery that you shared of Mary coming to the feet of Jesus, and just that intentionality to, okay, the Lord is calling me to come, to be still before him, to surrender, to just open my heart to what he has to say, what he has to give in this moment. And, our response being, yes, Lord, I'm coming.
Hmm. Right.
Love it. Well, Donna, it has been a true joy to connect with you. And thank you for sharing just a little bit of your story, your journey, and leading us through or giving us an invitation really to start connecting with God in this way of quiet that's so countercultural
Yes.
and
Yes.
and challenging for all of us who are busy checking the boxes of life and doing all the things. But thank you for that reminder and invitation to sit at the feet of Jesus and just meditate on a word that he gives us. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners how they can connect with you. I know you have a lot of online resources, and also wanted to give a plug for your beautiful memoir. Uh,
Well, thank you. Yes, I would love it. I do these things. It's all volunteer, and I guess I've been trying to rely on the Holy Spirit to be my media person. So this is a great opportunity to ask people to help me spread what I do, because I think I hope it can help people. So number one, I have a website, serenityandhealth.com, and you can subscribe to my blog. I don't flood you. It's once a month, and I would love for you to receive that. And occasionally there's something extra, like I'm doing a 10-part video series now called Engaging with a Messy World, about um, how we can deal with what we all face in a positive way that might bring benefit instead of more walls and defense and anger and violence. So that, if you subscribed to my blog, you would get that as well. And my book is a pilgrimage, a doctor's healing journey. It came out in during COVID. It also has resources in there. And I would love to hear from people. One benefit I have found from doing what I do is that I have made new friends and connect with old friends. Occasionally, it's really cool, and like I like to stay connected with you all. We do share a lot.
Absolutely, yes,
Yes.
it's very very healing, to connect with another family physician who's gone through
Right.
the similar process in their career, and just hear now that you're I think it's just beautiful, the different stages of your career that you've had the opportunity to help people on increasingly more intimate and spiritual ways of
Yes.
connecting. So
Yeah, it's a privilege. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it very much.